Welcome back to the Better Learning Podcast. My name is Matt Rogers. I am not always the typical host of the podcast. I've kind of co-hosted and stuff on the side, but I'm really excited to lead this conversation. I'm going to get into a little bit more why I'm leading this conversation. It's going to kind of come up naturally. I'm really excited to introduce our guest. I'm going to let her kind of give a little introduction of herself, who she's with, and kind of the role that she plays. Candice, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Candice Leinneweber. I am a director of design at MA Plus Architecture, and right now I'm just working on really helping lead the design of the firm and kind of in all aspects of the work that we do, but also education is a very big part of what I do.
Amazing. And it sounds like from your last name, you have some German roots.
So I've been told. I'm actually more Bolivian than I am German, but that's a kind of another story. My mom's side of the family is from Bolivia originally.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about her story when she came over to the States.
Yeah,
And
so I don't know all the details just because I feel like there's some hush hush stuff on some of that. But I do know that my grandfather on my mom's side used to be a politician in Bolivia and actually immigrated to the Americas during a coup. And so he was essentially escaping a toxic political environment. My grandmother married a very, very, very American guy, and which is why I look the way I do. Don't look as dark. But yeah, we they moved to San Diego, and I was born there, grew up there for a good portion of my adolescence. They still have family there. Still go back and visit occasionally.
you said you grew up there, and then I believe you made your way to Texas. And yeah, what's kind of that
Yeah,
journey?
so it's a long story there. So my parents, my dad met my mom in San Diego while my grandfather on my dad's side was stationed at the Navy base there in San Diego. So they kind of stayed when they got married. My grandfather on my mom's side owned a bakery. So my dad, working with him, opened another bakery, kind of almost like a franchise type thing. There's only two, and we had a bakery for a while. So I grew up kind of working in a bakery, on the side, obviously not outside of school, of course. And it was maybe around I was 10 or 12, right around the Thanksgiving. I remember it was Thanksgiving because, of course, Thanksgiving we always had to do pies the night before. So like my parents are there baking pies and we're just twiddling our thumbs there in the bakery. So I remember it because it was so boring at the time. But one of those weeks right before Thanksgiving, there was a fire in the strip mall where the bakery was located, and the whole strip mall burnt down. And because of that, we no longer had any ties connecting us or economic ties connecting us to San Diego. And my dad owned some property in Oklahoma, and so at that point, he decided let's just pick up and move. And so like just basically we packed up and moved. And it's kind of funny because I was thinking about this question of like what got me into education and architecture in general. And there is no clear, oh, I was the Lego person. Like I wasn't that person. I didn't even know about architecture until high school as a possibility. And that actually kind of spurred into some of the stuff I'm doing now and what brought into some of the initiatives I'm working on just because of that background. And so, like I said, we moved to Oklahoma and spent a good portion of my time here, high school, obviously, and then went to Texas, like you mentioned, for a little bit. Started in a business degree, again, still not thinking about architecture as a degree. It wasn't until, believe it or not, I took an accounting class because I was taking business courses, and I decided, you know what, business is not for me. I need something. I need something a little bit more fun,
It's
more
it's
design.
funny. It's funny. It seems like accounting, if people are in like the business realm, it seems like the accounting classes are the ones that kind of wean people out of that
Yep,
that trend. So that's
yep,
that's
yep, yeah, yeah. And it's funny though because growing up, my having a bakery, my mom and my older sister were both cake decorators. And so they were always very creative. And we're talking maybe not the level of is it cake, but something similar. I think my mom at one point won a cake decorating contest at the San Diego Zoo for like an alligator shaped cake. So like there's creativity there. My older brother was always creative. So growing up, I never really saw my creativity. And of course, being director of design, obviously, hopefully, I have some creativity. And so there was really no awareness to even look for that. Going through college in Texas, I went there for like a year and a half. What actually got me to switch to architecture was an English literature course. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's kind of interesting story. I had the seeds of architecture were planted in high school. I had a high school classmate said she was going to go into architecture. And so I was like, oh, that's a field. And then one of our classes, we took a college aptitude test to kind of see like what would be your strengths. And architecture was right on the top of the list in terms of like, hey, this is a career that is great for your aptitude. And I was like, whatever. But when I took the English Lit course, I did a paper on Louis Kahn's museum down in Fort Worth. And just the way he approached light and shadow and how that became kind of the story of the art form, it just married art and technical together to a point where I was like, okay, this is more what feels more like home for me. And so at that point, I kind of made the decision, and I switched to Andrews University, which has a really good architecture program up in Michigan. Kind of hit the ground running from there. I haven't stopped in terms of like where I'm going with architecture. I came back to Oklahoma at some point because my parents still live here, and then took my master's at the University of Oklahoma and started at MA plus architecture after that, and I haven't left since.
Well, thanks for kind of going through your personal background there. I kind of want to pivot this now to kind of talking about like, yeah, you've talked about your history and what, kind of maybe what drew you a little bit into architecture and design. I kind of want to talk about like, when you kind of made that transition in college to coming more into architecture and design, first, I guess, what outside of just that literature course that you took, what else led you to this and kept you on the path of being here?
I really, really liked the combination of art and technical. I've always kind of been a logical type person. Like I said, my parents, being very creative, I didn't see that in myself at the time. But when I kind of saw that I could take an art factor and mix it with a technical factor, it felt comfortable. And so I really enjoyed that. And I will say too, like there were times where I was like, I don't know if architecture's for me. This is a lot of work, and it's just, it's studios or late nights and things like that. And at one point, I almost switched to graphic design, but in the
Mm,
process, I actually applied. But in the process of doing that, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to be happy. There's just not enough meat to this. And
mm,
so, and the other aspect to that too is I've always had that drive to do something that means something for people. And
yeah,
so that was one thing that really kind of kept me going in architecture. I think that's probably a common trope that architects just want to change the world, but it's kind of true in that like you can change people's world, little by little with what you build, and you can really fit that in, especially true with schools where students don't necessarily know what's good or not, but having the ability to provide something that is beneficial to them is just something that keeps you going.
yeah, absolutely. And for those for our listeners, I work for a company called K-12, and very similar to what you're talking about too is the ability to want to be able to make that positive impact. One of the things I love about what we do is we track the number of students we impact on every project that we're able to touch. And it's definitely a part to me that keeps me going and keeps me involved in the work that we do. So I love to hear that you said that and just kind of that connection to how you kind of got into the spot you're in now. So one of the things I kind of hinted at the beginning of the show was that you and I had a similar thing that just kind of connected both of us. And I'm going to kind of reveal that now. So in 2025, you were revealed as one of Ed Market's Next Gen Award winners. And for
Yep.
our listeners, you're probably very aware that back a couple years ago in 2023, that was the inaugural year for the award. We featured a lot of different voices from that community on our podcast. And what we're trying to do now is still kind of dip into those because it was such a great series to kind of hear from those next gen people in our industry. And Candice, you're our first one for 2026. So I first want to congratulate you for that
Thank you.
award and for the work that you're doing. But I want to kind of dig in and say, what do you think that recognition says about where educational design is, or is headed, and just how our generation is approaching it differently than in past years?
What I won the award on myself was actually not specifically for design within education. Part of my background that I haven't shared yet is there was a portion, like when I first graduated out of my bachelor's degree, it was 2009. And so it was during that time frame when there was not a lot of people hiring. And so it was very difficult to find a job. And so I had worked at a grocery store for a little bit. And during that process, I somehow got connected with a local university, Oklahoma State University's Oklahoma City University satellite. And they're like, "Hey, you just graduated. Can you teach these courses?" And I had a little bit of public speaking in high school, and so it wasn't completely new. At the same time, I was like, I'm committing to a whole semester. Like, what if this just tanks? I agreed to it because I was working at a grocery store. And I was like, well, at least this is in the right direction. And so I actually taught there for about 7 years, and I since have taught at Oklahoma University of Oklahoma on an online course. And so I've got the background of teaching as well as architecture. And so what I applied for the award was really what I'm doing in terms of how do I get awareness of architecture using that teaching background in general. And so like I mentioned before, I didn't grow up the Lego kid. I didn't know about architecture. I feel like I got a late start because of that, where some other people like they knew since high school or before that they were going to do architecture. In my mind, it was like, well, maybe there's more awareness that we need. And so what I started doing is I chair a committee with AIA, our local chapter here in Oklahoma City or Central Oklahoma, where we're working on building out a framework that we can engage local school districts. Really what we're trying to do is create something that can be scaled up to where we create the ability for students to visit job sites where they can shadow architects, maybe engineers, even contractors, and also spending time, taking them to a university and let them see what the pinup process is, for students at the end of year review. Creating a framework that's simple for us to do, that's sustainable, and something that, districts can easily slot into, just to create the ability for students like, oh, this is something that I think that would be beneficial that I could do. Also keeping in mind everyone's journey is different. And so there's some people who would want to go all the way, become licensed, but then some people, maybe that's not their path. Obviously, being part of AAA, we are going to recommend that people get licensed. But we're hoping to create a framework that really gives people off-ramps where they can go as far as they are able to go based on their unique circumstances. And hopefully, eventually, this becomes something that branches out to other states, other technical schools, connections. Big brain ideas. Hopefully, like we just got to get that target started, type thing. But we're starting to get some traction on it, and I'm pretty excited about the direction it's going.
Wow. So many questions that I could take it from there, but I've got to ask, it seems like you said, you're trying to create an avenue to just showing what's possible. And I'm
Yes.
curious, you kind of mentioned earlier that you didn't always know the path of architecture, when you were in school. So I got to ask, was this initiative from your perspective kind of built around that idea that you wish you maybe knew about that path earlier or sooner? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that when I took that aptitude test, architect was like right up there at the top. My first initial gut response to that was, oh, that's too high of a mark for me. Like I can't reach that, just because I hadn't had the background or the knowledge to really know better. And so I think it's maybe less about just accessibility or understanding it, and more about making it feel obtainable. And I think the more exposure that we can give to something, the less mystifying it feels for people. Where a student who's in the quote unquote inner city, they can say, hey, this is a path that is attainable for me, and they can be empowered to actually take that path.
I do want to pivot and kind of talk more about the work that you're leading now, and some of the design philosophy that you take to your work and the impact that you have. And so one of the things that has, it just really stood out to me when I first noticed about your background was that you don't just approach projects from a single lens. I saw that from your background, you're trained as both an architect and an interior designer,
Yes.
which isn't always the case in our industry, I would say. So yeah, and in K-12 environments, especially, we often see those disciplines kind of operate in parallel rather than fully integrated. So I want to kind of hear, or how does that dual perspective influence the way that you think about learning environments as a whole? And do you have like projects where examples where maybe the work that you're doing right now, where that kind of applies?
Yeah, I would say just being cheeky about it. I'm a control freak maybe. But on a more serious note, when I approach a project, I try to put myself in the position of the person who's going to be using that space. And of course, there's a lens shift as well because you're thinking about the person who's maintaining the space. You're thinking about the people who are functioning, like the staff and the teachers. But there's also, of course, the students as well. And so you're thinking about durability. You're thinking about like the awe of the space, and you're thinking about all these things. And one thing that also drew me to architecture was I've always been a very practical person. And so if I can take something that looks good and say why it's important, like that just makes me happy. Every time I work on a project, I'm always thinking about what are all the things I can do with this one thing as well. So it creates flexibility. It creates multiple reasons for why a beautiful element is important to a space. And I really try to find that practical element because it always makes it more important in the end to the person using the space, but also hopefully hitting all those targets of maintenance and durability and all that stuff as well. All while thinking about, people are different, people are unique, and so there's going to be different perspectives. And so it's a really challenging thing because I mean, design is subjective, like what someone thinks is beautiful, other people might not like it. And I've experienced that as well. So, I mean, you can't please everyone. But that's kind of how I approach it, is trying to think about what's the most I can get out of this amount of space.
Sure, sure. I completely agree with what you say, where you're not going to be able to please everybody. But one of the things I think that you can always do to, even if somebody isn't always pleased, collaborating and
Mm-hmm.
just talking through is always like one of the best things that you can do.
Yep.
So from your process, what does that look like when you're talking about collaboration between yourself, the educators, construction teams, whoever that might be? Yeah, where does that process tend to go on the projects you work on?
Yeah, I kind of approach projects with the idea of maximum transparency. I know that I don't know everything. I mean, obviously, we like to think that we know a lot, and I have learned lots over the years, but I have been in my zone. And yes, I have architecture and interior that kind of helps broaden that scope a little bit. But contractors, I'm constantly asking them questions about, hey, we want it this look. This is the product that we've selected. Do we have an option that, like, hey, what's the cost on this? Do we have an option to reduce costs but still get that look? So we are constantly talking back and forth to make sure we get the look that we want, the feel that we want, the durability that we want. That's still within the budget that we have. When it comes to owners, we want to talk to them before we even get started. Like, hey, what's your end goal? Like what do you want to try to accomplish? And I've always kind of approached it as well as I know they don't know everything also. And so when I get a response, we want this thing right here, I always want to ask why, because maybe there's something alternative that actually fits their goal better. Obviously, it's all in respect. Like, we're not trying to tell them how to build their building, like what they want and what they don't want. It's just a matter of teasing out, understanding what it is they want, and why they're selecting something. And if I don't know, like, the best way to get about to that, I know I can ask consultants, I can ask, my team members, and we do that too as well internally. Like, we'll spend, more time than probably we should just talking about one little thing and what it would look like or how it goes together in the field. And of course, we kind of go in a circle until we get to the point where, like, we're back to where we started. But at that point, it's not wasted because we have exhausted all what is it, the 101 ways not to make a light bulb type thing. Like, we've basically eliminated all the things that won't work, to get to that one thing that does work.
I love that. I love that philosophy too. Yeah. And I feel like when you're able to kind of go through that, it really shows that you're ready to kind of embrace a more forward thinking approach rather than just kind of like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is the way it's always been done. Yeah, and that definitely leads me into, my next question of it sounds like you're kind of digging into it a little bit, but when you run into maybe some of those clients that maybe aren't always, adaptive to like
Mhm.
looking at the other possibilities, how do you kind of move the conversations from this is what we've always had to this is what's actually possible when you are trying to kind of break those barriers? Is there a certain tactic or certain things that you kind of see that work to overcoming that thought?
Yeah, I really bring it down to trying to understand the why. If you can boil it down to what are you trying to accomplish? Like I'll just give a really simple example. I worked with, and this was not a school project exactly. It was an art institute project, working with a client who hadn't had any experience with design or building, so it was a new process for them. And they would say, we want this exact thing. This doesn't really fit with the metaphor, but like, for example, they said they wanted a black sink. And I knew what they were wanting, but I still asked the question, do you need a softener? Like, what do you have hard water? Because I'm really saying, like, thinking through, like, okay, if you have a black sink, you're going to get all those, mineral deposits at the
Mm.
at the base of it. And I knew from previous discussions that they didn't want something that was hard to maintain. And so just really simple things like that, or it could be much larger discussions about, the security of the building and like where do you put extra doors with key card readers to maintain security for your students, and just talking through the process and how they operate. And so it could range, like, really. It's really just comes down to understanding their why, and then really trying to find the solution for that.
That's great. And yeah, I love kind of just always working that backwards, that conversation backwards to finding that.
When we work with schools at K 12, it's not just about furniture or design, it's about impact. Our radically student centered approach puts students at the center of every decision. From that first conversation to the final walkthrough, we're focused on creating spaces that actually work for the kids, the teachers, and the community. So if you're looking to do more than just check a box on your next project, let's talk. Visit K12.com. That's KAY TWELVE.com and see how we're helping schools transform learning one student at a time. Because at K 12, it's not just about projects and furniture, it's about purpose.
Kind of want to hear more about the work that you're leading right now, some of the things that you're working on, and really dig into the trends that are happening in educational design right now. Like what excites you most, and what are you kind of seeing in the projects you're working on currently? Yeah, that you feel like is just exciting and great for our audience to kind of hear about.
When we're talking about school projects, I would say the biggest thing that keeps coming up on a brand new project is security. And there's a joke going around of like we're just building prisons for kids because it's so locked down and tight to maintain security to where you kind of lose some of that whimsical and fun feel. And so really trying to move the conversation away from, just solid concrete walls and bars on windows and things like that. And what can we do to a project that gives the security required and the safety required for students, but doesn't feel like it's that, prison essentially. I will say I'm currently, I think I mentioned this is before offline. I'm currently going through the A4LE ALEP program right now, and I will say something that really stood out to me in one of the first courses was thinking about how students use the space and how unique students are. And so I'm kind of pivoting a little bit from the first answer, but really comes down to, in my mind, like how unique people are. And I promise I will tie this back. My experience growing up, I was the quiet person, but I always had a lot going on in my head. And there was always my brother, of course, was always the one going out and talking to people and doing things. And so it's very easy to kind of put people in boxes in terms of like, oh, the quiet people, they like math and they like, reading. And I was quiet, but I'm not really that much of a reader. I listen to things, I watch, shows and things like that, but I consume information, not really a large reader. And math's not really one of my strong suits. And so that's just kind of an example of saying like, okay, not everybody is what they appear. And so one of those courses that I took really kind of dove deep into the learning styles of students, multiple different ways that you can approach a learning environment, and just trying to currently find a way to kind of mix that with how do you make a space feel inviting as well as secure, and make sure you have all these little aspects where students could maybe go find a nook where they feel like they can be alone, so to speak, or a quiet space, or have the space where students can be active. I know kids like to run around and jump around. I have a couple nephews that they're just constantly moving. So giving them the environment that they can do that in. I've actually been given, if I can pivot to what I'm working on right now, there's a high school in Norman, Oklahoma that we're working on. It's under construction. It's a high school, so it's not like we're doing anything for young kids, obviously. But those two aspects we actually worked through in that project. It was really fun. We actually went and interviewed the students of the school, got their input, had them fill out surveys, and that was one thing that they brought up, like, hey, we're worried about school security. And so the things that we looked at in the school is like we wanted it to feel open, inviting, but also safe. And so we obviously worked through making sure we had the cameras and the locks and things like that. But we also wanted to have the ability for students to feel like there's visibility between spaces. And so we kind of went like in the halfway part. Like we got some areas where they if something does happen, they could hide. But like for the majority of the time, like, hey, it feels open and airy. The fun thing about this project, it's aviation themed, so it's like a STEM project, and it's called Oklahoma Aviation Academy. And what was great about that project is there was a lot of community support for it, and a lot of community backing. I think they've got some connections with Boeing and things like that as well. And so it was really fun to see that community grassroots essentially aspect and build in, and the connection with the local university as well and their aviation program, and being able to create a space that essentially they're going to have tours walk through the building. And so we created a whole pathway where it's almost like there's that neighborhood watch going on. Like students can see things happening. There's a large barrel vaulted space where I'm hoping there's going to be activity constantly in that space, kind of classrooms flanking that space. And so we'll obviously have sound separation, things like that. But that was a really fun project to think through all the aspects of how students are going to use the space, all the technical aspects of, okay, we're going to have a room that needs all these 3D printers and, air compressors, and we're going to have a wind tunnel, and, all those things included, while still creating a space that a student can come to and be like, oh, this is a fun little, building, and I see all these graphics about aviation on the walls, and really help create student pride as well in the space.
That was a perfect time for you to kind of bring it all back together and talk through, that project right there that you're working on. It really hits on, everything that we've talked about to this point, your design philosophy, the impact that you're looking to make, how you're getting those folks involved of really making the right decisions, and then really talking about the process. So I appreciate you kind of bringing that in there. I want to ask too, you mentioned like student surveys specifically, and I want to kind of ask, as you're kind of getting that feedback and you're doing a lot of this work on the pre-side, especially with this project right here, Oklahoma Aviation Academy, as you're kind of working through your projects, I know this one's still not completed yet, but for some of the others, like what's your process look like as far as like, we've done all this research on the front end, right? And we know what we want to kind of do to make sure we encompass all of that. What does it look like on the back end when, a project's finished? Like, do you all kind of do a lot of whatever it is, surveys, or get, collecting feedback on like, yes, this, as like from the student's perspective, yes, I do feel a lot safer. This was what I was looking for. What does that kind of look like in your approach to the projects that you work on?
We currently don't do a ton of post-occupancy surveys on a lot of our projects, but that is something our firm is working on implementing, especially on projects like this one. And there's another project that I personally was not involved in, but it was an elementary school in Mustang, Oklahoma, where it was also, related to security. And there were a lot of things that they implemented on that project that they were able to get, the security aspects into the project within a reasonable budget number. Like we're not putting in bulletproof glass, we're doing these other things instead, things like that. We're currently in the process of developing what that looks like. We are definitely interested in knowing, all these design moves that we made, like as we're learning this information, it's something that's been moving fast. And so it's just the projects have to catch up with the design philosophy that we've developed. And so that's definitely something that we're going to be working towards and knowing and researching too. Like I'm in the process of researching what other people have done, to see like, hey, what have you done on these projects? I'm not doing this in a bubble. Like other people across the country maybe have different ideas I haven't thought of. And of course that could be different based on the locale as well, but that's definitely something that we're currently developing.
So one of the things I always like to ask in any interviews that we kind of lead, and hearing some of the amazing work that you're working on right now, 20 years from now, right? We're looking back at some of the work that you're doing. What decisions would be made, or what things would you be looking for in 20 years to kind of say, this was a success. The design process that we went through, it mattered. What are those things that you look for to say that was a huge success 20 years down the road? What are things that you think you'll be looking for?
Yeah, so just on the surface, did that material I picked, did it last 20 years like they said it would, or is it falling off the building? Like that'd be, just on the surface. But like more in depth thinking about the project as a whole and whether or not it was successful from a space planning perspective or the usability of it, is I would want to walk into, just thinking specifically about Oklahoma Aviation, just since we've been talking about it. If I were to walk into that space, I would hope to see the spaces that were designed for multiple activities. I would love to come in multiple times and see a different thing happening in that space. So like, for example, we have a space that was initially a gym that just turned into kind of a multi-purpose room where they could do assemblies and they could do drone flying and they could do all these things. And they have a great, huge, barrel vault over it, really tall space. A lot of opportunities. I would love to walk in there and see them doing egg drops off the balcony, or seeing drones flying around, or seeing them do esports, in there as well. Like just different activities happening. We had a kind of a unique feature. Like I know, like learning stairs is all the rage, in some cases. Relatively recently, so we do have one of those, but we kind of put another spin on it because. One aspect that tends to be overlooked, in my opinion, is the acoustics of it. And that was going to be our landing zone for people coming in to do a tour. And so we provided a stair, obviously, and then some seating on that for that learning aspect. But then we kind of created a kind of fun element over the top of it to kind of box in that sound. And then added some cool graphics on the windows to kind of show things in space and things like that. But also a screen and some acoustics in terms of like AVL audio, speakers and things like that. And so I would love to walk in the space and just see a pickup class just happening on those stairs, where they have the teacher can plug in their computer and throw it up on the screen and the students can do a quick course, or maybe it's a study group for kids who are in a group and they're doing a project for another class as a homework assignment, as well as people coming in and having a tour. So I would just love to see all the specialty elements that we put in there actually be utilized. If they're not, then obviously there's something that we didn't design correctly, because we designed it we hoped to design it in a way to where it would be easily accessible. Anybody can sit down and utilize the space for whatever they're trying to do. And then we have multiple different areas, of course, where they could, do more specialty things. But that would be successful for me is to see those spaces being utilized.
Yeah, and I love that to hear that it sounds like you all are very strategic and when you're looking at those things to looking far in advance. On the other end of the spectrum, obviously, as you continue to grow in your career, how are you thinking about balancing, innovation with responsibility as well? So there's the other side of things where there are the trends that really, tend to kind of, come to light, but maybe they're not always necessarily what's best for, looking at the future and what's sustainable long term. So from your perspective, when you're designing spaces that shape communities and students' experiences, what are you looking for to really, showcase that, this trend is the right way to go for a project before just kind of jumping into it?
Yeah, that's a challenging thing, for sure. I've always really thought about that on my projects in terms of I don't want to design something that's only going to be good for a couple years. I'm really hoping that anything that's put in can be utilized for that 20, 30, 50 years, however length of that building. Of course, that's always hard when it comes to design because design is trends. And I've asked this question to people like what is, timeless design? Is there such a thing as timeless design? And obviously, when you're talking about function, there's one answer, and if you're talking about like the aesthetics and the looks of the building, there's another response to that. So it's a difficult thing, and always thinking about like what is the future of learning as well. As I mentioned, I used to teach some courses at the college level, and so I have a little background in terms of like creating curriculums and things like that, and I know that all changes too. Kind of where I've landed personally is how can I make this space as flexible as possible so that it can be picked up and rearranged, adjusted, or just change out these few things as needed to where it just completely changes the use of that space. Classrooms are easy, they're just a room. When we're talking about those multi-purpose spaces, the specialty spaces like the learning stair that I mentioned, trying to design it in a way that you can, as things change, maybe your curriculum changes, but that space can still be utilized and just adjusted in small ways.
I love it. So, Candice, yeah, we always like to ask our guests, what does radically student-centered mean to you? And again, with the award that you've been given here and recognized with for Ed Market, obviously this is probably something you've had in the back of your mind through all the projects that you worked on. So I want to ask you, what does radically student-centered mean to you at the core when you think about that phrase?
Yeah, as far as being radical about something, I always think of like what's going to upset the basket, and it really comes down to, in my mind, kind of what I mentioned before of really trying to cater to all unique students, and how do you find a way to create a space or even a lesson plan that can cater to as many of those different students as possible. It's not going to be something that you can achieve every time because there is so much variety of unique people. And, of course, you're never going to please everyone. But I always try to approach things, whether that's a design aspect or the mentorship program that we're doing in our firm, of always trying to meet that student, whoever that student is, where they are.
I love it. Well, for our audience, I'm sure you can already see why Candice was a great candidate for this Next Gen Award. I want to kind of close this together here by asking something that, again, I love to kind of wrap up our podcast with. And I guess, yeah, Candice, is there anything that I missed that you wanted to talk about today with our listeners? Is there any final thoughts, any final words that you would like to leave our audience with today?
I would just say something that has been kind of my North Star, whether I knew it or not, kind of going through this process of becoming licensed and finding my way through architecture, has always been, I've always had that kind of loose goal of I want to be in this area over here. And so in my mind, that was an architect. I didn't know what that meant at the time. And that's just kind of helped me basically, what do I pursue? What do I don't pursue? And I apply that as well to architecture. On a project, you kind of know loosely the ultimate goal of a project. You want to have a safe building. You want to have a fun building. And as you kind of go down the rabbit holes of projects, the maintenance guy is getting hung up on the type of light fixture you're selecting and things like that. It's really just trying to make sure that we spend time zooming out and saying, okay, we have 4 different options here. Which one is getting us closer to that end goal? And so that's kind of been my philosophy and kind of what I would impart and I find useful for people in general is to make sure we don't lose track of the broader goal in things. And there's always going to be those little minutia things that kind of veer us off track. But that overarching goal can really kind of bring everyone back to that focus point.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I do actually want to ask one more. I know I said that was going to be the last one, but also on the other end, I want to kind of see if you would leave us with some departing words for those that kind of tie this back together. For those that, again, this is for next gen, those that are really, going to be leading the next generation of educational design. Those that are kind of on the edge or thinking about getting into educational design, as you kind of said too, like, you kind of had like some of the questioning of, is this where I want to be? Like, what final words would you give to those that are still kind of thinking through, like, is this what I want to do? What are the final words that you would offer to them as they're thinking through that?
Yeah, that's a very good question because I did go through a period where I was constantly questioning, am I on the right path? Is this really something I'm going to enjoy? I'm putting a lot of time and effort into this. And I will say education design was not at the top of my list. I just wasn't aware of it, as going through architecture school. On the surface, it can seem like a very narrow field. Like I don't want to specialize on something. Like I want a broad field. But when it comes to education, in my experience, my horizons have been broadened to the point where like there's a lot of really fun things you can do in education design that people don't think that necessarily are available. It's like, oh well, I'd rather do something over here where I can spend more money because there's always the budget, right? And so just realizing the breadth of what can be done and the amount of people that you can affect within that has really been something that I've been learning in the last few years. And I would just say to anybody just kind of on the brink of wondering if this is their path in education design, I would say give it a chance. I've always kind of had that philosophy as well. It's like try something. If you're not sure, try it. And if it doesn't feel right, drop it. And then move on to the next thing. And there's been a few things that I have dropped, and then there's been quite a few more things that I've tried and been surprised. Teaching is one example of that. That's really led into a lot of other things for me as well, just in my firm and mentorships in the firm and building relationships with K-12, AIA committee. So there's been a lot of things like if I were to look ahead 10 years ago, I would be surprised by where I'm at today, but I don't regret any of it just because I tried it and I was surprised that I enjoyed it. So I would recommend at least giving it a shot.
I love it. Yeah. And I would definitely echo that. And my experiences too is try it. You'll never know. And I always try to live with, no regrets. And I feel like that's the way to do that. So yeah, thank you so much, Candice, for joining us. For our listeners, betterlearningpodcast.com is where you can find more about us. Give us a follow on social media. We're on all platforms, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. So we're all on there. Give us a follow, give us a like. Candice, I am super glad we got to feature on the podcast. Glad that we got to hear some of the things that you're working on and just the process that you go through. Really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it.
The Better Learning Podcast is produced by Matt Rogers and edited by Kelly Jones. The views and opinions shared on this podcast are those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily represent the perspectives of their affiliated companies, organizations, or associations.